Amilcar Cabral wasn't talking about an individual dream. He was talking about a collective dream. I mean, there was he would get the folks he was working with, and he would say, "Okay, let's dream together." And it is that communal process of dreaming together, of realizing that if one person's dream is powerful, imagine the collective dream. And that we cannot think of a democratic society or the creating of a socialist alternative outside dreaming collectively.
How lovely to see you. I got a
Oh,
thrill
you.
when I saw your name up there on the screen. Thank you.
Hi, Peter.
And
Hi.
it's really wonderful for you to be here today. And I know it's not been an easy part of time also, but thank you so much for coming and closing the conference on what has been an absolutely outstanding, and that's not a superlative. It's been so much for the last 2 days. It's been incredible. So much beautiful brilliance, excitement, emotion. It's been incredible. There's loads of people I want to thank, but I'm going to just say thank you to Elaine for bringing the Canadians. I'm going to, and for making all of that happen and so much work elsewhere. I want to thank Joe for doing the podcasts and Lou and Hina for doing Chai Time, and for everybody who's been in the collective and make this get to here, to have this really brilliant event, and also this absolute privilege to have Antonia Darder here with us today to close the conference. So I'm just going to give a little introduction for you, Antonia, and then I'm going to hand over to you. So this is Antonia Darder. I know a lot of you know all about her already. But she's distinguished herself as an international Freerian scholar. She's a public intellectual, educator, writer, activist, cultural worker, and artist, and also a lovely and kind and supportive person throughout this process, I can say. She holds the Levy Presidential Endowed Chair of Ethics and Moral Leadership at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. She is Distinguished Visiting Professor of Education at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Emerita of Education at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She is an American Educational Research Association Fellow and recipient of the American Educational Research Association Scholars of Color Lifetime Contribution Award, as well as the Freer Social Justice Award. As a working class academic, Antonia has worked tirelessly for almost 40 years to fearlessly counter social and material inequalities in schools and communities. Her scholarship has consistently focused on issues of racism, political economy, social justice, education, and society. Through her award winning writing, she has worked to extend the contributions of Paulo Freire and bring an anti colonial reading of critical pedagogy to our understanding of inequalities in schools and society. Darder's critical theory of human development consistently brings together questions of culture, power, and pedagogy. Through her decolonizing scholarship on the body, ethics, and methodology, she has contributed to rethinking questions of empowerment and liberation in the lives of racialized and working class communities. Beyond her work as an organic intellectual, she is a poet, songwriter, and visual artist. Antonia's current association with Banner Theatre in the UK brings together pedagogy, politics, and art to engage struggles of educators and other working people on the ground. And here she is with us on the ground, and it's so wonderful to have her with us. And so, Antonia, I'm going to just hand over to you. Thank you so much for being with us, and take it away.
Thank you, Peter, for having me. Really happy to be here with you. I want to, just be really transparent with you. It's been the last 3 days have been really hell. Two people whom I love dearly have died, and one that succumbed to COVID, and I'm just, I'm trying to be in my body. I'm trying to be here with you, and I'm trying to say a few words in closing. And I want to do that in a way that, honors and respects all of the work that you all do. And And I hope that that'll come across. I've tried to write some notes down. These are going to be rough, but I'm just going to go with it, and then I'll stop. And then if people want to ask questions, that might be even an easier way for me to to you know engage with you all. Okay. So I just want to say that I don't know how many sessions you all have attended, but I trust that these have been the 2 days filled of just wonderful opportunities to share and learn together in ways that I hope have sparked a real sense of commitment to working class issues and to the power of working class thought in the construction of our revolutionary dreams. Of course, at times like this, we're always left with a sense of where do we go from here? I mean, there's so many beautiful ideas and so many issues that are raised, particularly during a time of great precarity and difficulty around the world. The pandemic still continues to rage, uh, creating a fourth wave in many countries, while neoliberal forces are using this moment to further consolidate its stronghold on the society, including universities, leaving many activist scholars and educators struggling with the impact of working jobs that are soul numbing and rob us of our dignity and passion. And often, if it weren't for our students, I think most of us would absolutely find no place where we could have any sense of life in the academy. So how do we keep then the excitement and energy going that's manifested in these moments of community, of comradeship and solidarity? So I was thinking about these questions. I'm thinking, well, what has always helped me to continue my work over the last 40 years has been my relationships with comrades on the streets and with my students, as well as my family, friends, and community. From time to time, I found, colleagues who were, but it's always a tricky situation when you come as a working class person into the academy, which is a very privileged space, and the manner in which the relationships can always be somewhat intense or tense in respect to the differences that we bring, that often we don't realize that we're presenting in these different ways, but in fact we are. But anyway, over the years, then my community has become more internationalized, which serves to remind me that we are not alone in this work, in this struggle, and that there are millions of people around the world who are involved in political struggles for a socialist alternative where people matter more than profit. So beyond my relationship with people, it's also this incredible legacy of working class communities that keep me energized and focused in my participation in the struggle for a more just world. In my teaching and my activism and artistic endeavors, I try to always keep in mind, whether that be in my personal reflections or my dialogues with others, the power of working class people and working class thought in my life, how important the positionality in which I grew in, and what I garnered from that, the way I was positioned and the way that I grew up. For me, this includes both respecting and being grounded in the reality that all modern societies have been built on the backs of working people, not the ruling elite or their managers. They have been they these societies have been built on our backs, on the backs of working people. Working people have brought their intelligence, their human sensibilities, and the power of our bodies to all aspects of society. And what is so crazy to me is how often our work requires that we push against these attitudes and these views that somehow working people are ignorant or stupid or daft or thick, in ways that are just so demeaning, and that those attitudes rise up in relationship to the communities, or the context in which we work. This is to say that the world would quickly unravel without our labor and all of our skills and understanding of the world. As an aside, there's no such thing as unskilled workers. Every time I hear that term, unskilled workers, it just makes me want to, go crazy, because all human beings develop skills through the very process of everyday survival. So the issue is that the human skills that are acknowledged in society are generally those that are in the service of the wealthy and powerful, or in the service of capitalist accumulation. So reinforcing this commonsensical belief, or what I call a lie, that some people's skills are more deserve to be paid, that are more important, more useful than others. And I believe that this is, one of the hoax that exists in a capitalist society. It is a way that the labor of working people is exploited and invisibilized in order to perpetuate the myth that the wealthy deserve their wealth. That it isn't some greedy, uh, um, process that has allowed them to accumulate this wealth, while the majority of the world's population is kept impoverished, or one check away from being homeless. The process of invisibilizing the working class begins early in the schooling of working class children, where it's not unusual then to find that by the age of 9 or 10, 11, around there, a large number of these kids begin to believe that they are somehow thick or dumb, that this is why they can't learn, rather than they're, they're they think there's something wrong with them, which is what the institution teaches us, that there's something wrong with us if we don't learn, rather than that there's something wrong with these institutions in the fact that they actually create a system to perpetuate a particular class structure. This is one of the most brutal forms to me of child abuse, if we want to talk about it. There is within any society, to educate a large number of the population to believe that they are unable and thus unworthy of academic success and unworthy of well-being in their lives. And if they live in poverty, or if they struggle with unemployment, that's their fault. Hence, they should be happy with whatever job that they can attain. Moreover, during the impact of the pandemic, we've seen workers suddenly become essential workers. How these people have been essential workers, forever, making it possible for more affluent people to live in comfort, to receive care and treatment, and as well as enjoy their entertainment without a care for all the working people in the world that make this possible. Similarly, working class people are invisibilized in academic work and within elite discourses, where working people seldom are part of the discussion. So I'm reminded of an experience that I had when I had just come out of the university with my PhD, and I had an opportunity to teach at MIT in Massachusetts. And I was sitting at a meeting, and they're having this meeting about welfare. These are the welfare system, and about welfare recipients, people who receive help from the state in the United States. And I'm sitting there, and these people are saying all sorts of, comments that are demeaning in terms of people on welfare, which are, people who are poor, and most of them women and children. And so at some point, I just raised my hand, and I said to them, I want to know who in this room has been on welfare. And of course, none of them, they're all male, by the way, they were all men, none of them. And I said, well, I think the way that you're talking about welfare recipients is completely off. You have no understanding that people don't want to be on welfare, that the majority of people are looking for work and want to have the dignity of work. And so there's some of the ways of these discourses that are very victim blaming discourses persist in the academy. In fact, working class academics and scholars are expected to adopt the codes of power of the privilege in the university, as well as the agendas and methodologies for research that often go against our very interests, against the interests of the communities that we come from. The consequences that many academics from working class fail to acknowledge, recognize, or understand the wealth of knowledge and wisdom that we bring to the process of knowledge construction within the university. Instead, efforts are often made to intimidate us because our cultural style of participation, the language we use is different than the dominant class, because we don't cite enough people, because what you name it, there's all sorts of ways in which our scholarship is delegitimated. In the process, working class intellectuals have to often contend with a certain disdain and disrespect in our efforts to participate with mainstream debates that are more often than not shaped by efforts to support capitalist modes of production and accumulation within society. At other moments, working class academics, especially academics of color, are utilized in the same, in this way that we're utilized to show that the institution is somehow has diversity, in ways that end up being really demeaning and disrespectful, but of course unacknowledged. And disrespectful because it's almost they pull us out, when they need to show that they have diversity. Even in discussions about decolonizing the university, there's little attention that's been paid to authoritarian impositions of neoliberal policies of accountability, of competition, marketization, instrumentalization of the curriculum to meet corporate exigencies rather than to meet the needs of staff and students. Meanwhile, labor in the university continues to be numbing as it becomes more and more casualized in such ways that many staff are barely able to subsist on the wages that they're paid. These policies are instituted within working conditions that reinforce a culture of silence among working class academics who often are concerned of losing their jobs, and particularly of color, and decreases opportunities for our dialogue. So it's precisely for this reason why a working class academic conference is so essential and so important, and that it should continue to grow and more, hopefully, move towards an international conversation. We must also contend then with the corruption of neoliberal language that provokes false notions of our work. For example, excuse the expression, but this bullshit myth of professionalization, that somehow we're professionals, that is very much used to initiate people into a false sense of status, while it actually perpetuates structures of privilege and inequality. Another important issue then that we have to be willing to engage as we move on and with our work are the ways in which working class issues are both similar and different depending the cultural or societal context in which people find themselves. If you are Black and working in an Anglo-centric environment, your issues will differ with respect to your efforts to navigate racism within the context than your white peers. Similarly, the issues of working class migrant communities have to be understood with respect to the cultural specificities and the material conditions with which they are contending with on a daily basis. This also is at work with respect to the labor of women, of gay and lesbian scholars and educators and transsexual working class workers. I mean, there are the conditions we have to understand are going to be engaged differently. There's going to be different needs. And the only way we can understand those are not to think that we know them, but rather we have to be in dialogue and engaging one another on these issues. As a consequence of these differences, some want to speak of a divided working class. However, I believe this is not a helpful manner to look at the issues of workers or their communities. Instead, we have to struggle to find ways to enter together into revolutionary struggle across our ideas, across our differences of culture, of gender, of sexuality. Helpful in our analysis then is to understand that working class struggles are shaped by the material and social conditions and realities that most people must confront in our lives, at work, at school, and in community, even within our homes. So the issues surrounding a revolutionary project must be focused on creating material and social conditions that allow working people everywhere to thrive and contribute to the world. Within the academy, this means our capacity to understand ourselves as workers who have the potential of connecting our struggles, our scholarship, connecting our scholarship to our struggles, both locally and globally. So, for example, in many parts of the world, there are unions that are supposed to support and focus on the concerns of workers. But more and more workers are beginning to link their struggles internationally. And we see this, for example, the nurses struggling here in England, they understand their struggles as being linked to the struggles of nurses who are going out on strike in Australia, in South Africa, the US, Canada, other parts. And part of the struggle has involved issuing critiques of workers' unions that have failed to support their strike efforts sufficiently. This capacity to understand that conditions, for example, in the academy in England, are actually connected to global neoliberal policies that are running rampant in universities in Australia and India and South Africa as well, is important for our labor. As such, international working class struggles are some of the most important ways in which we can begin to make the nexus necessary for placing pressure on the fascistic, uprising, ultra conservative governments that continue to move in the interest of capital while ignoring the interests of the majority of the people and especially the most vulnerable populations. Another issue significant as we move forward from here is understanding that we need to respect different ways in which people labor, rather than falling prey to oppressive ideologies that attempt to universalize how people work for change. We must stretch our consciousness to understand that we must create an abundance of opportunities for people, and we must do this together so that we may, can become involved in the larger political struggle. A good beginning is the notion that we struggle to become coherent in our lives and in our labor with that vision that we want to create collectively in the world. In other words, how is the way that we are in the world, how does it link to the vision of the world that I want to live in, that I want for my children and my grandchildren? As such, we need to bring our bodies, our hearts, our minds, um, and souls to our efforts to promote open critical dialogue and advance a socialist democratic culture of possibility where we can build consciousness and thrive as human beings. Here we are called to live with self-vigilance about the consequences of our own thoughts and actions with respect to the lives of working people and subaltern communities. We have to think about our scholarship. How does our scholarship contribute to opening the possibilities in relationship to working communities, to working class people? Um, the struggle against racism and other forms of social exclusion then is about our struggles for identity, cultural forms, and possibilities that engage with the needs of politics of the body, where our differences are engaged as significant to our biodiversity. We need to be different. We need difference, in fact, is part of what inspires creativity, creates a kind of creative tension. And so instead of trying to homogenize as a humanity, we should be embracing our biodiversity. One thing that is clear to me is that concerns for the bodies and human sensibilities are far more present in working class concerns and interpretations of the world as they are in feminist concerns and interpretations, where the possibility to consume is curtailed. If you don't have a lot of money to be out there spending, you're going to put your attention and concern toward relationships and concrete concerns related to our survival. And that's what we find, that's what we can learn in terms of what goes on in working class communities. And those of us that come from working class communities have a sense of this. Moreover, it is in our body and through our sensibilities for justice that we wage resistance and struggle against the injustices that strip us of our revolutionary dreams. So lastly, I want to turn to the indisputable power of hope. Bell Hooks wrote, "Hope is essential to any political struggle for radical change when the overall social climate promotes disillusionment and despair." The power of hope as an essential ingredient for radical struggle is what is key for me here. Despite our critiques of the historical and contemporary conditions faced worldwide, we have to refuse to surrender our social agency or our faith in people to transform the course of history. In the spirit of Freire, we must recognize the power that a pedagogy of hope brings to our struggles for radical social change, whether those struggles are in the classroom or out in the streets. As Hooks argues, hope is a necessary component if we are to radically counter within universities or societies the forces of patriarchy, of material oppression, and racism that's intensified under neoliberal rule. As working class activists, we understand that education does not occur in a vacuum. Our efforts seek to make our labor a political endeavor for liberation in which we critically unveil the conditions that shape the lives of educators, of students, their communities, and seek avenues for the reinvention of our world. Moreover, the power of hope is even more essential to our political struggles against global economic tyranny, where stark inequalities are politically explosive. And to the extent that the system is unable and unwilling to reverse them, it turns to ever more violent forms of containment. Increasing state control over people's lives, therefore, is bound to reflect the global capitalist reality of the so-called new normal that we're living, particularly as governments more fiercely seek to impede the mass movement and protests of people on the streets, which we're seeing right here in England, with this new law that they're attempting to pass. With this in mind, this constitutes a radical call to action if we are even to dream of a more just and equal world. As such, I want to argue passionately for an education that and university labor that is life affirming. And I think that that's what we as working class academics bring, is a passion and a life affirming way of understanding the world, where students everywhere can experience the democratic conditions to develop their critical abilities as citizens of the world, who are prepared to freely engage with their lived histories with self-determination, to embrace an abiding promise to global justice, and to a commitment to labor together as freedom fighters and loving architects of a truly just world. The African revolutionary leader Amilcar Cabral firmly believed that all political struggles for liberation begin with the courage to dream of a world that does not yet exist. And it is this ardent spirit of hope and faith in the possibility of human beings to transform our world, which is profoundly reflected in images and stories and protests and chants of, of you know, different struggles, particularly three struggles that I'm thinking about, where millions of people this last year put their lives on the line for a collective dream. People worldwide took to the streets and have taken to the streets in support of Black Lives Matter protests against the Minneapolis police killing of George Floyd, who was unarmed, a Black man killed by police who was unarmed. The force of Black Lives Matter protests not only intensified national debates in the US, but sparked much needed international debates about anti-Black racism. The far-reaching influence of the BLM movement underscored growing multinational resistance to state-sanctioned racism, particularly against Black men and women around the world. In Bristol, for example, British protesters fell a statue commemorating Edward Colston, a 17th century slave trader. The public defiance generated debates about racism and history in a country where over 8 million people today identify as Black, Asian, minority, or ethnic. The violent US-backed overthrow of democratically elected President Allende in the 1970s brought into power Pinochet, one of the earliest proponents of neoliberalism, which some people don't realize. Along with a repressive state apparatus in Chile, the dictatorship swiftly put into place extreme free market system of large-scale privatization. After years of unprecedented levels of austerity measures, state repression, and human rights violation, the people of Chile waged a mass struggle of resistance against the current government. And these were working people. Beginning in 2019, hundreds of thousands of people effectively launched a social uprising across sectors of the population in opposition of the Piñera government. At street protests, they would chant "El pueblo unido jamás será vencido." You know, the the people will never be overcome. The masses stood firm in their demand for not only changes to the national constitution, but the end of state repression. The people called for explicitly incorporating into the constitution, social rights related to public education, to healthcare, to housing, employment, and prison reforms in an effort to end the brutal legacy of Pinochet's dictatorship. In October 2020, after a grueling year of national political struggle, 78% of the people of Chile democratically voted to approve the rewriting of the Chilean constitution. And in India, you may all be aware, but the farmers waged one of the largest political strikes in the history of the world in response to neoliberal inspired laws. on November 2020, 250 million people, if you can even imagine that, marched to Delhi to join a general strike in defiance of the Modi government's refusal to rescind initiatives aimed at a program of agrarian modernization that would result in the takeover of the nation's agricultural production by large transnational corporations, destroying the independent livelihood of small farmers who comprise 56% of India's workforce. The farmers' astonishing level of solidarity and organizational commitment, much the same as your solidarity and your commitment, accomplished through their deep faith in the collective power of workers united, despite a lack of economic resources. I mean, they were able to wage this with little resources, but with an incredible deep faith in the collective power of workers coming together. As the inhumane ideology of capital continues to fail people around the world, it is only a matter of time before the pendulum swings and the political struggles of trade unionists, of climate change activists, of women in struggle, of peace groups, and other revolutionary organizations around the world will coalesce with boots on the ground to fight against the inhumanity manufactured by global capital. Our human survival and the survival of the planet indeed depends on nothing less than a worldwide political movement to end the barbarism of capital rule. And this political movement has to begin with each of us. This demands not only the reinvention of a new meaning of education or new meaning of university life, but a reimagining a life-affirming, just and loving global existence, a world where life is exceedingly more important than the profit margins of the powerful. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Oh my word, Antonia. That is a life lived and steeped in the values and the principles of just pure love and beauty for a world. And that was thank you so much. I haven't looked at the chat. I like a lot of people here. I'm just entranced. I can see the chat's up to 75 things. There'll be loads of clapping. There'll be. I know what's gone on in there. I know what's gone in there. So can people put Q&As? Let's ask Antonia some questions if that's okay, Antonia. I know it's a really,
Yeah,
really, really
yeah,
difficult
it
time
is.
for you.
As long as
So
you know.
I'll read them. Yes, but what I think comes from this, and for me, this is for me, and the whole thing that you have brought, and I knew that you would do this because you've done it every time I met you, is our individualness sometimes feels ridiculously small and far too little to be able to impact and make the difference. But actually, that's the only thing that can make a difference. Just behaving in different ways or being true to ourselves, being authentic, using that working classness not as some kind of thing to suppress and to hide from, but as something to begin from and to
Absolutely.
recognize and to do that with. And oh wow, you do. So every time I meet you, it's honestly, if only I could. Yeah, there is nothing more powerful than that, and that idea. As you were speaking toward the end, and I was trying to think about what I would say back to you, and there's an event in the. I don't know. You're in the UK right now. You're still in Birmingham, aren't you? But
Yeah, I'm going to be
there was
leaving soon, but yes.
yeah, well, there was an event where some footballers. It was a big event, but there was this ongoing, continual racist tirade against football. This guy in particular, Marcus Rashford, is the guy who campaigned for free school meals. He's an absolute genius of a man, just brilliant. And a poster that was by where he lived in Manchester got defaced. And what happened was,
Right, right. I saw that. Yeah,
people have taken little things, post-it note size things,
right.
love, and stuck them on. One of them on its own would have been nothing, but hundreds and hundreds and thousands in the build-up of that. And that's what we need to be able to do. And Antonia,
Absolutely.
you've just brought that.
And there's such a history here. I mean, you just go, to the miners, to the incredible organizing that went on with the miners in this country, and how that, how people came together, how people broke across, their differences, broke barriers that had existed, and came together when they when they could see that every struggle in one way or another is our struggle. You know, that the sense that we separate, like, oh, this is important because I'm a woman, or because, you know, or, you know, I'm not Black, so that's not important. I mean, that's just bullshit. The reality is that when any group is oppressed, when people are treated with injustice, it impacts all of us. And I think that that's one of the pieces that, for me, as working class academics and working class scholars, that we have much more of a sense of a still sense of collectivity, of a collective experience, of collective history of struggle, material struggle, social struggle, political struggle, and that, you know, we understand it not as something, not as just a project, you know, this is a project that we're going to do, but we understand it as a way of life. And so, you know, I think that if we understand our struggle as a way of life, then we have to understand why relationships are so important to us, why our comradeship and our solidarity is so important to you, why community is so important to us, because we cannot do this alone. We, you know, these are all these struggles. They begin with the individual commitment, as you pointed out. They begin with, you know, our you know, bringing ourselves to that struggle, because nobody can, you know, the truth is we need to come with you know, our 2 feet into the struggle and make that kind of commitment, and it has to be a lifelong commitment. So I see, you know, for me, people say, like, how can you continue, you know, and you know, the disappointments, or, you know, what happens. And I said, you know, disappointments are a part of life, and that's what working people know at a level that I think, you know, people who are more privileged, who've had a much more comfortable life, they don't understand. We understand that suffering is just part of life. We understand that we have to, you know, that struggle is part of life, rather than some anomaly or something that we do, you know, just so that we can, you know, feel good about being down with the people. You know, we do it because it is our life, it is our way of life, and it is part of the knowledge and wisdom that we bring to our work in the academy.
Thank you, thank you. And do you know? And I think you're right that things are changing. I wonder if Socia, Lisa, and Caroline, did that answer your question? Because the questions were all, and they're brilliant questions. But so I'll read them out, Antonia, because you might have more to add. So Caroline said, "How do you sustain the fire? There's been such an onslaught by capital, and it's draining." And Lisa, you know, I said, "Dear, you're always so giving of time and love. How do you replenish your energy?"
Yeah.
And she says, much love. And so she says, where and how do you maintain, where do you get and how do you maintain your passion?
Yeah.
So do you just respond generally to those?
Yeah, well, I think I'll go back, you know, to the same thing, that I understand that none of this, that I don't do any of this alone, you know, and that how I sustain myself. I mean, there's also some ethics by which I live. I live by the ethics of integrity, of coherence, of being honest, of being self-vigilant, of willing to listen, willing to accept critique, willing to struggle, willing to speak up even when no one else wants to speak up, finding the courage, you know, that you people think that, you know, that when we speak up, oh, it takes so much courage, but each time that we speak up, it actually fuels our passion, and it reminds us that we have a voice, and we have a voice that needs to be heard and needs to be brought to the conversation. I think, again, um, I our personal relationships are important. You know, I think we need to take care of ourselves, and I think that often, you know, I don't want to get but we need to take care of our health. We need to take care of, you know, of rest. We need rest. I mean, this is hard work, and if you're in it for life, right, it's like, you understand that it is not, you know, this isn't just, you know, a few months. This is ongoing work, and it's hard. It's constantly pulling at us in all sorts of ways. As people said, you know, we you know, it seems that just as we start to make some movement, you know, those with power are ready to squelch it. And I think it makes us very, very strong in our capacity to see what Paulo Freire called those limit situations. We become very good um, and those being able to see the limit situations are important because it's through those cracks that we also find ways to regenerate ourselves and to try new strategies. The other thing is our willingness to stay embodied. I mean, it's hard to be present all the time. It's hard to stay to remember that our consciousness is and our body is constantly being, regenerated, but also uh, um, challenged. But I think our willingness to stay at the table, our willingness to engage people, and our willingness to accept defeat. I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but some battles we're going to lose. But it's not about always winning the battles. Of course, we want to win these battles, but every time that we struggle, I think it's important, at least for me, I see it as part of a long, a large, extended historical revolutionary struggle for our liberation. And it's my little drop in the ocean. And people have heard me say this before, but I always think of it like this, like we're each drops in this great ocean of humanity. But I'm going to make sure that I'm going to do the best I can to be the most powerful little drop I can be wherever I am and in whatever I do. And I think that, another thing that people don't talk about, but I think, working class people understand loyalty, understand the importance of loyalty, understand the importance of relationships. I think and it's powerful because so often when people talk about working people, there's a tendency to talk as if we're somehow less than, somehow lesser in our culture, lesser in our capacities to love, or lesser in our capacities to understand the world. I think that that's bullshit. Some of the greatest philosophers that I've seen have never stepped into a classroom. They've been in the classroom of life, and they have built philosophies and understanding, and they speak with such a powerful language, a passionate language, and it's very much that language that when we come in as academic scholars and working class academics, that sometimes they immediately, at some point, first they find us kind of colorful, but then when we get, when we're there and we're continuing to bring up these issues and do it in our own way, it begins, they feel very annoyed by it because we refuse to accept their ways of speaking and their ways of moving our bodies, and it's something that people don't talk about. But even our very presence, the way we speak, the language we use, the way we dress at times, all of those things come into play in the way that people perceive us and attempt to undermine the wisdom and knowledge of working academics, working class academics.
Thank you. So there's such a fire in you. And I'm going to maybe this goes a little to a separate place. I'm going to take them in order. I'm going to, well, in
Okay.
reverse order. I'm going to ask Khalil's question and then go to Alex's. Khalil says, great change is required at so many levels to become a critical pedagogue. What advice would you give to students to help to change or shift their ideologies?
Khalil, I would say that that we can't, that often there's this notion like somehow we're going to have, there's some magic formula or magic approach or something. My experience has been that we have to be willing to roll our sleeves up and engage in dialogue. I mean, just constantly engage in dialogue, ask questions, ask the hard questions, be willing to listen, even when we don't agree, be willing to listen and begin, and also, allow ourselves to be touched by other people. Because sometimes what happens is if we don't agree with someone, we actually say we're in dialogue, but we're really closed off. Their dialogue can't happen if we're closed off. We need to be open to the possibility that we will learn in the exchange and in that dialogue. So to me, the critical pedagogical process is one that respects the power of reflection, that engages with critical dialogue, really opens the room for an open dialogue, and that then takes that reflection and dialogue into action. So I think for me, then it's in our work with students or in our work in our own lives. The question is, how do we live our pedagogy? How do we live these actions that are necessary in order for us to continue to contribute in challenging and resisting these forces of oppression that are in our everyday lives. I mean, they're everywhere. So it also, I think just the last little piece with that is that it is an everyday thing. So we don't become critical, critical thinkers and critical agents, social agents in our life just in the classroom. It's a living praxis. So we have to find ways to do it with our children, to be engaging with our children, to be engaging with our family members, with our friends, and understand that it is a process of problem posing. And it's like anything, the more we do it, the better we get at it, because we begin to lose our fear of being wrong, which is really super important. It's a very important aspect. Yeah, I can't be in order to have a dialogue, I can't be worried that I might be wrong. I have to be willing to say, okay, there is always that possibility that I need to rethink. And the only way that I can do that is with other people. I can't, you can go to the stuff in your head all alone, that we cannot transform in our head all alone. I don't care what they say about enlightenment. I'm sorry. I'm just not into that stuff. I believe that the way we're transformed is in community. The way we build consciousness is in community. And so our classrooms are a community. And so part of our work is the building of critical consciousness in that context.
Well, that was an incredible answer, Khalil. I know you're going to be happy with that. I don't even have to ask. That was superb. Thank you. I'm going to get to Alex's now. Alex, he's from the Ragged University, and he asks, "What can you tell me? What you think the role of intellectual property law is playing in the enclosure of education?" It's a very good Alex question, and he follows up with the ways that societies are passing the notion of property and who has access to said things.
Right. Oh, Alex. Hi, Alex. Good. I love you. And I love your questions. Always they're very provocative. The first thing I want to say is that copyright stuff is just bullshit. It's just a way of commodifying knowledge, at the point that you codify and commodify language, then you can buy it and sell it, and then you can use your accountability, methods on it and all of that. And so what if we understand it in that way, which is the way that I understand it, is that it actually it interferes with the development of knowledge. It interferes with the flow of free ideas. It interferes. It pretends that individuals come up with ideas all on their own, and they somehow own it. And I simply do not believe that. I believe that it actually stunts research. It stunts the construction of knowledge, because everything that I said today isn't something that I just came up in my little head, and like, oh, I'm so brilliant. No, this has come out of struggle, out of dialogue, out of labor with others. And it's a commune. Knowledge is communal. And what that does, at the moment that you try to copyright knowledge, what you're doing is commodifying it and very much hyper individualizing it. So then people become much more, for example, one of the things I hate within the academy is that people become very invested in coining a phrase or coining a word. And then that word gets repeated over and over, and nobody asks, how does continuing to use that word outside of the phrase, outside of the context which it evolved, how does it actually stop our capacity to see more fully these different contexts in which it's being used? So I think that understanding um, our construction of knowledge in a communal way is part of our struggle and our fight. And we've seen it with the way that promotions go on. For example, in the States with tenure, if you co-write, your book gets less weight than if you do a single authored book. Yet the truth of the matter, co-writing is actually more difficult than writing a book individually. If you've ever co-written a book, co-writing something, because you have to negotiate, you've got to struggle, you got to work with another person. Yet within the tenure process, it's perceived in the States, it's perceived, I don't know how it is here, but it's perceived as somehow, less a rigorous, like a less example of a rigorous contribution to the field. So there's all these different ways in which we are actually losing the potential of people. We're actually stymieing their evolution, their development of consciousness through putting such effort in this notion of copywriting, you know, um, ideas, because that's really what it is, the copywriting of ideas.
Thank you. I want you to say something to Sarah for me. Sarah Colburn said, "When the devil whispered a storm is coming, I whispered back, I am the fucking working class storm. This is my motto while I do my MA in a space where I am the only black working class woman and wrote my first essay at 46. I will keep going." And I just wanted to
Bravo.
say that. Yes.
Bravo.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for putting this
It's
in.
beautiful. I love it.
And I don't know, Alex, how are we? Because this is the last thing we're going to do. I could keep doing this all night. I, I think people love all that's coming through about the idea of a living praxis. I mean, you mentioned Cabral and the dream. We used that last year to open. And what's the point of a revolution to begin with a dream?
Yeah.
And a question I'll ask about, I'm not taking anybody else's because there's nothing else there in terms of questions right just now.
Okay.
What's the distinction between the communal, the practical, the real, the being on the streets, the correcting the wrongs in our micro ways, and the dream? That place that's kind of not quite there. Dreams by definition have to be individual, don't they? But that dream, how do we get those two things to work together?
See, I think that again, that is very much how we're trained to think, that
Okay.
dreams are individual. But Amilcar Cabral wasn't talking about an individual dream. He was talking about a collective dream. I mean, there was he would get the folks he was working with, and he would say, okay, let's dream together. And it is that communal process of dreaming together, of realizing that if one person's dream is powerful, imagine the collective dream. And that we cannot think of a democratic society or the creating of a socialist alternative outside dreaming collectively. And in so many ways, Paulo's emphasis on reflection and dialogue were so much about how do we find the ways to bring out the hidden dreams that are in all of us, dreams that we don't even speak at times, and what it really are, what we're really moving towards or pointing towards is the possibilities. There are so many possibilities in the world, and we don't, often we forget that what we're being presented are these limited possibilities that have been created to serve a particular purpose. And the purpose is, the recreation of particular class structure to perpetuate, a particular redistribution of wealth and power. And so we begin there and say, well, why is there only this alternative? And one of the hardest things within the neoliberal university is the manner in which the curriculum is being instrumentalized in in ways that actually limit and fracture its ability to truly speak to what goes on in the world. So we get these fractured notions of history, fractured notions, of sociology, fractured notions, and that often are not linked to the actual lives of students. When students are coming in with so much, I mean, they've survived. They've survived. They've had to, they've lived in communities, they've struggled, and often their knowledge is not being brought forth. So I believe that the dreams come through our experiences, through our histories, through our ancestors, through our willingness um, to enter collectively in solidarity. So the collective dream, in essence, emerges from a solidarity that allows us to surrender to an understanding of ourselves, not just as individuals, but our understanding of ourselves as communal beings.
Wow. Thank you. Antonia, we're 20 minutes we're 20 minutes over.
Oh.
I don't know if everyone or two, but we're 20 minutes over. And you have done so much for us, and I'm going to say thank you.
Okay.
Alex has got a question. I'm going to leave that there. You can answer Alex's question elsewhere, because I know you've come to this and you've given so much. People are writing standing ovation and ovation, and I know that's happening everywhere. I don't know what it is. It's some kind of special thing that when you speak it, and even when I read you, you're not even in the room, but you do manage to bring that love to life. So I'd say to anybody, just watch this when it's back and go and read Antonia, but keep that fire going. One of the things about this week is we've had 2 days of brilliant speakers doing lots and lots of what Antonia has encouraged us to do. And I want to know what we can do to help. What happens next? What are the next steps for us as a collective? Because we do host around this, we come around this. What can we do to keep that going for the future? I don't speak Italian in a good accent, Vasilisa, but grazie mille from Italy is from Vasilisa.
Yeah.
Lots of people saying wonderful things. You can read them in the chat. And I just want to end the conference by saying thank you, Antonia, and to everybody else. Send your thoughts. Let's make something happen and keep this going. But thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so
Absolutely. All right, Peter, thank you for letting me be a part of this with you. Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Adios.
Adios.
Bye-bye. Our human survival and the survival of the planet indeed depends on nothing less than a worldwide political movement to end the barbarism of capital rule. And this political movement has to begin with each of us. This demands not only the reinvention of a new meaning of education or new meaning of university life, but a reimagining a life-affirming, just, and loving global existence, a world where life is exceedingly more important than the profit margins of the powerful.